We're going to learn a little bit about logical and natural consequences together in this screencast. Specifically, we're going to define them, determine the differences between them, and then figure out how we apply them in our guidance philosophy. First, we're going to start with the definition of consequence. That is the result or effect of an action or condition. We often think of a consequence as negative, but it certainly does not have to be that way. For example, if you eat well and exercise, you will most likely be healthier and live longer. So that's a really positive consequence that we can experience in the world. Let's define logical and natural consequences. So first, a logical consequence is the extension of a behavior that is logical, and it can occur with or without the intervention of an authority figure. However, a natural consequence is the result of behavior without the intervention of an authority figure. So a teacher or parent, in the case of our course material, cannot be involved in determining this consequence. Logical consequences must be logical to the child and be not determined in advance and rigidly enforced by the adult. If either of these two things happen, if either of these things do not happen, it becomes a punishment, and it is no longer a learning opportunity, and likely trust is broken between the adult and the child. Logical consequences are most effective when we do use them as a learning opportunity, and the natural consequences are too dangerous, or there is a negative reinforcement that we do not want to occur. So negative reinforcement is the absence of something negative that would encourage a child to do something. So an example is, if you let your child eat junk food before dinner, then they will not eat their healthy food. That feels like a positive, right? So instead, we often say a logical consequence that we often apply for children is, it's dinner time. You need to eat your fruits or vegetables before you can have a dessert or a treat. Thereby setting up healthy behaviors for the child in the long run. But if we just let that child have junk food every day without eating their healthy fruits and vegetables, then they are not able to see the consequences of that for a long time. Natural consequences are most effective when there is no physical danger and the child can learn from this opportunity and self-correct. One little caveat I have here is that oftentimes we will impose a logical consequence when a natural consequence could occur that might provide a little bit of a physical experience, but is not really dangerous. For example, we might stop a child from jumping off a shelf and say, "You could break your leg." Likely a shelf that is 2 feet tall will not break someone's leg. It might cause them to get a bruise, but it won't break their leg. Now, I'm not saying you should let children run wild and jump off shelves. There are many reasons that they shouldn't, but we just have to be careful about what our justifications are and not over dramatizing a potential physical danger as an excuse for a logical consequence. Let's talk through some examples. I'm going to give you an example and pause. You're going to think about, say out loud, because of course I can hear you, what you think this is, whether you think it's a natural or a logical consequence. So let's get started. A child gets burned with playing with the stove. What kind of consequence is this? Natural. We wouldn't want to stand back and let a child get burned by the stove because that could be very dangerous. But if this did happen because the adult was not seeing that, then of course that would be a natural consequence. The child spills the milk and the parent shows her how to clean it up. You got it. It's a logical consequence. The child spilled the milk. The adult uses this as a learning opportunity to work with the child and teach them how to clean it up. The child spills the milk and slips on it later. That is a natural consequence. Because the milk was left on the floor, the child slipped. The child hits their friend. The teacher speaks with them about it. You're getting good at this. It certainly is a logical consequence. Because of the result of hitting the friend, the teacher is spending time as a learning opportunity, helping the child process that experience. The child hits their friend and their recess gets taken away. I hope you spotted my trick question. This is a punishment. It is not logical to the child. I would argue it's not logical to me as an adult. It doesn't connect with the behavior. It is superimposed and is separate from that. Even if the hitting happens on the playground, the hitting has nothing to do with the outside environment, and the consequence of taking away that gross motor and free play time from the child is a punishment. A child hits their friend and their friend stops playing with them. You got it. Natural consequence. The authority figure did not impose this. This happened between two children of equal standing. The child jabs toward a peer with their scissors while they are angry. The teacher takes away the scissors until the child is calm and ready to use them. You got it. Logical consequence. The teacher is making sure that there is not more jabbing with these scissors and someone does not get unnecessarily hurt. And it also implies here that the teacher is supporting the child to calm down and use them safely. A child refuses to put their shoes on and their feet get cold outside. You got it. Natural consequence. This is a big tendency in early childhood. It's a thing that happens all of the time where we get ready to go outside and we're doing shoes and hats and jackets and mittens and all of those things, and a child does not want to wear something. It's likely because the concept that the weather outside is different than the weather inside is far too abstract for that child to understand. And as a teacher, we often, refuse to take them outside. We nag, we push until we can get everybody ready to go out there. I would argue that a better lesson learned is to say to that child, okay, but you may get cold. Take your shoes with you. See how it goes. And then when they get outside and it's, 30 degrees out and their feet are cold, those shoes are coming on real fast. And they have the opportunity to learn from the natural world around them. Okay, few points to remember that are really important here. Logical consequences are not effective when used as punishment. They no longer become a logical consequence. When we use them as a punishment, then the child begins to ask the question, what do they want me to do and what will happen to me if I don't? And all they think about is the punishment or the consequence to themselves, as opposed to if we use logical consequences in a supportive way, the child over time asks, what type of person do I want to be and how will my actions impact others or impact the world? They will start to look at their actions and reactions as having an impact on the world around them. Another important point to remember is that logical consequences cannot be determined in advance. You cannot say to a child, if you do X, then Y will happen. So you can't say if you hit your sibling, you're going to go to timeout in your room. Because then this is no longer logical to the child and it becomes a threat. And what happens is the child will believe that you don't trust them to make a choice. You think they're going to do something, quote, bad. And the only way they'll make a good choice is if you impose a punishment on them. I also would like you to remember that natural consequences are not an excuse to avoid intervention. That is punishment. So an example, if we go back to not wearing shoes outside, if the child doesn't wear shoes outside and we say, okay, fine, leave them in your cubby. And then we get out there and 5 minutes later, the child's feet are cold and we say, oh, that's too bad. You decided not to wear shoes. So your shoes are in your cubby. And now I guess you'll just have to be cold while you're outside. That's a punishment. Because as an adult, you could have foreseen that. You could have seen that coming and done something differently. You could put the shoes by the door so that when the child is cold, you can just open up the door and grab those shoes for them. You could say to the child, bring your shoes outside so that if your feet get cold, you have them. Or you could say to the child, I'm sorry your feet are cold. It's really cold outside. Let's go inside and get your shoes. But if you do not do that, if you use this as an excuse to avoid intervention and to let that child experience that punishment, they will begin to believe that you are not invested in their best interest and you will not help them overcome the obstacle, even if they created it. And that will break down trust and will certainly come at a cost to adult-child relationship. And in the future, they will not trust that you have their best interest at heart. Instead, they will believe that it's more important for you to say, I told you so, than it is to help them learn a new way. So that concludes our screencast on logical and natural consequences, and you are ready to move on to the next step in your module.